I want to create a dashboard based on the data that I see in front of me here in this sales worksheet. The first instinct I have anytime I want to create a dashboard is I want to create a pivot table. And the easiest way to create a pivot table is to create an Excel table first and draw a pivot table from that. To create an Excel table, I click my mouse anywhere in the data. I go to the Insert tab and click on Table. That automatically assesses the range of the data that's in this worksheet. I click OK. That creates the table. And generally it's a good idea to name the table in this text box here. I'll just call this table Sales Data. Once the table has been created, I can create a pivot table from that. And I can do that by going to Summarize with Pivot Table, or it's the same thing to go to the Insert tab and click on Pivot Table. Anytime that we do that, generally, if I've already clicked my cursor into the table, it picks up the table or range that I want to use. And even if I'm on a different worksheet, I can always type the name of the table in there, and hence why it's always convenient to name your tables. I can also make the choice whether I want to put the pivot table on a new worksheet or keep it in the existing worksheet. But generally, we usually put our pivot tables on a new worksheet. Click OK on this dialog box. That creates the new worksheet, and I can see my pivot table ready to start dragging fields into the different rows, columns, values, and filters. Now that we've got a pivot table set up, let's go ahead and drag some of the different field names into the rows, columns, and values so we can go about creating a pivot chart. So for instance, if I take the date field and I drag it into the rows section, if the date is of a particular format, it will split that date into years, quarters, and date for me. I don't need the quarters, so I can just take that field and throw it out. Next, I can drag in any of the other fields into the value section to pick out all of the different sum values for the particular years that I see in the rows section of my pivot table. So I'm going to look at the revenue section, and I'm going to drag that field down into the values. Let's explode these years to see all of the different revenues split between the different months of each year. I want to create a pivot chart based on this particular view of the pivot table. So I can click in the data of the pivot table and go to Pivot Table Analyze and click on Pivot Chart. That will create a column chart by default. And let's just reformat this column chart to look a little bit better. My first step is to expand all of these different years for all the different months. So if I click over here on 2018, right click and go Expand Collapse, Expand Entire Field. That explodes all of the different months for 2018, 19, and 20. In the column chart, we've got a little bit too many columns here to fit into one chart, so it might be better in this instance to change this column chart to a line chart. I'm going to click on this chart, go to the Design tab and click on Change Chart Type. Go into Line and just select the first 2D line chart. Next, I think that this total legend is not necessary. It's not adding anything to this chart, so I'm going to select it and delete it. Next, I'll go into the y-axis. I want to click on the y-axis, right click, and go to Format Axis. Go to the number section, drop that down, and I would like this category to be formatted as a currency. And we will format it as Euro. And we'll take away the 2 decimal places, replace that with 0. And then finally, again, making sure that that y-axis labels that they're selected, I'll go up to the Home tab and just grow that text a little bit. Just make it that little bit easier to read. I'll also decide about this title here. I can either write the title in on the chart, or if I know that this chart is eventually going to arrive into a dashboard, I can choose just to keep the dashboard, keep the chart clean, and put the title over the actual chart within the dashboard itself. And that's what I intend to do, so I'm just going to click to select that and click delete. Again, that just gives more space to the chart to fill the frame. Finally, before I leave this worksheet, I'm just going to rename the worksheet to Revenue by Date. I want to create another pivot table and another pivot chart based on a different viewpoint of the data. So again, I want to base this pivot table on the Excel table that I already had created in the sales worksheet. I can either go back to the sales worksheet and do the same system or method that I used the last time, click into the table, go Insert and click on Pivot Table, or I can actually create the worksheet myself and within that worksheet click on Pivot Table and type in the name of the data table, Sales Data. Click OK, and that will actually create the pivot table from the Excel table that was named. Both methods end up in the same place. It is whichever is most convenient at the time. In this worksheet, I want to get a breakdown of the different number of sales by the countries that we're selling into. To do that, I'm going to find the country field, pick that and put it into the row section. And then remember, I wanted to get the number of sales into each country. For this, we might need to know the data quite well to pick out which field is appropriate. So I'm going to go back to the actual sales data table, and going through all of these different fields, I can see there's an order quantity field here. So whether I choose to actually focus on individual orders and count individual orders, or actually count the number of different items that are ordered within each order, that's up to you. Let's look at how you might do both options. So I'm going to go back into the new worksheet. I've already picked country into the rows section, and now I'm going to go down and find that order quantity field, drop it into the values. At the moment you can see this is the sum of order quantities, so that is going to take all of the different numbers that are in that order quantity field and sum them all up and filter them out by country. If I wanted to count the individual orders and not the individual numbers that were in each order, then I could easily just click on this sum of order quantity field that's added to the value section, right click and go to field settings. Now within field settings, rather than doing sum, I could actually just choose count, and that would just count the individual orders without drilling down and summing up the different order items within each order. For the moment, I'll leave it at sum. And that's the view that I want. So looking over at that pivot table, let me just zoom in there a little bit. I've got the breakdown of all of the different sum of different order items that were ordered for each of the different countries that we're selling into. And again, I can click into that pivot table and go to pivot table, analyze, and select pivot chart. If I'm happy with keeping it as a column chart, then I'll just leave it like that. And again, I'll go through the same type of procedure as the previous task to tidy this particular chart up. If I wanted to sort the chart in a different order, for instance, if I wanted the top countries to be first and then to cascade down in order of size, then I can sort that just here in the pivot table. Whatever I do now to the pivot table, it will reflect in the pivot chart. So if I click on row labels and I want to sort by the actual sum of order quantity, and I click in descending. And once I X out of that dialog box, the pivot table is resorted. The pivot chart reflects whatever goes on in the pivot table. And I'm happy with that pivot chart at the moment. Again, I'm going to rename this worksheet and just give an appropriate name and then continue on. Just lastly, I'm just going to reorder these worksheets, just making sure that all of my different types of pivot tables and pivot charts are separated by worksheet, and I can keep an eye on where my original Excel table is, the sales data table. And the strategy here is by creating all of these different worksheets with my different pivot charts, I'll eventually have all my pivot charts that I'll be able to bring into one single worksheet, which will be my dashboard. And then I'll be able to organize those pivot tables along with slicers and different user controls to alter the views. So I've already done a line chart in my revenue by date, and I've already done a column chart in my order quantity by country. Let's go ahead and, again, I just want to give you a variety of different types of charts that we can use to bring into our dashboard. So I'm going to go back to my sales data Excel table, and I'll just click in there and I'll just go insert and another pivot table. Again, I'm going to put it into a new worksheet, and that's going to come in there as sheet 5, which of course at the end of this I'll rename as something else. So the next type of pivot chart that I want is I'd like to use a pie chart. And going down through all of the different field names here, one of the particular things that might suit a pie chart is the breakdown of different ages that are buying the types of products that I'm selling. So all of these different bikes in the actual original Excel table data, I have each particular order is broken down by age group. So I'm going to take age group, and again I'm going to pull it into my rows section. And then I want to think about what I'm going to compare to, or how I'm going to count or give a sum for these different age groups. Again, I can look back at the actual sales data table, looking down through all those different fields. Do I want to measure the performance of different age groups by, let's say, revenue or cost or profit? And each one of those might show different variations across those age groups. But again, I'm going to go for order quantity. This time though, I'm just going to go for a count, a simple count of order quantity, which is different from the order quantity by country chart that I'm just after doing. So I'll go back to my new worksheet, and I've already dragged in age group into rows. So I'm going to go down to the order quantity, but this time I'm going to, well, it's that sum of order quantity. I want to change that to count. So I'm going to right click there and click on field settings, and I want just to count all of the different orders. So I click on that, and I've got my different values here. So again, I'm just going to click back into the data, and I'll go to Pivot Table Analyze, click on Pivot Chart, and immediately that puts in a column chart. I want to change that to something else, so select the chart, go into the Design tab, and click on Change Chart Type. And I want to go down to Pie, and just click on a simple 2D pie. Straight away across that chart I can see that the most popular age group is the adult age group 35 to 64, and the next most popular age group is young adults 25 to 34. I can decide how I want to format that chart, and again I've got in my mind's eye what this is going to look like in a dashboard. The dashboard, there's only a certain amount of space there, and all of this wasted space here, especially just this space over on the right hand side, if I want to fit that into a dashboard, I'm giving over an awful lot of space over to that legend. If I want to save on space, maybe taking the different data types that are in the legend and putting them into the actual segments themselves, that might save on space. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this sheet. And that's another one of my charts done that is ready for my dashboard. So I'm going to save that and move on and create one last chart. We've returned to our Excel table, and we're just going to create one last Excel pivot chart. And by doing so, we'll just go to Insert Pivot Table and go to based on that table. And we've created a new worksheet. Now, in this last pivot chart, what I want to do is maybe focus in on the different product types that we're selling. So again, get a measure of the most popular types of product types that I have. Looking down through all the different fields that we have, again, if we want more detail, we can go into the actual Excel table again to eyeball all of these different columns. But I've got a product category and I've got a subcategory. I know that in the product category column, there's about 4 different product categories, but there's a certain number more of subcategories, and that's what I'm interested in. So I'm going to pull subcategory down onto the rows section. And in terms of measuring how much I'm selling through those, I'll put in revenue here. So pull in revenue into values. So I've got all different product subcategories and the revenue that they're bringing in. Now, if I want to pick another chart, again, I'll just click into the pivot table and go to Pivot Table Analyze and Insert Pivot Charts. That will put in my column chart as usual. And so far, every time that I've done this, if I want a different chart, I can just go in and change the chart. And I'll try and do that as well. I want a comparison chart. Give me a hierarchy maybe of showing me all the different ratios that or revenue share that each one of these product subcategories has. So there's so many different product subcategories there, it wouldn't suit to use a pie table or a pie chart, so therefore a hierarchy chart is maybe a good option. So I'll click here, go into Design, and go to Change Chart Type. And what I've usually done is just gone down, find the type of chart that I want, and in this case it is a Treemap, and I want to click on Treemap. Now, as soon as I do that, you'll see that this happens quite often in some of the more advanced tables. Anything really outside a line chart, or a pie chart, or a column chart, we often get this alert. You can't create this chart type with data inside a pivot table. Please select a different chart type or copy the data outside the pivot table. So we can use these types of charts, but we just have to do a little bit of extra work to circumvent the problem. So I'm going to click OK on that, and I'll just take that pivot chart that was there and delete it. So I'm back here again, and what it said in that alert was I can't use the data inside the actual pivot table. If I need it, I'll have to actually copy it outside the pivot table. For whatever different inner mechanisms that Excel use to keep track of the pivot table and dynamically adapt all the data in there when items change, we can't put some of the different chart types on it. So what I can do though is just copy the different items outside. So I've just gone in here to column C and clicked equals to put in a formula, put in the cell reference like I want there, and it's just going to take that data outside the pivot table. I can copy that downwards for all of these different items here and across for all of the different sums of revenue. So now the data is outside the pivot table. I've selected the data and I can just go ahead and insert a normal chart in the normal way. Go into the Insert tab, find the different types of chart that I want. In this case, I want a hierarchy and a tree map, and that puts in my tree map for me. Again, all of this data is within all of the different segments in the tree map, and so I've got my tree map table there. And I'm going to go with that tree map chart as it is. So again, I'll put in and rename my chart, and I'm ready now to go on to the next section and create the dashboard. In the previous few videos, we took the data that I see here in this Excel table, and I created a number of different pivot tables and also pivot charts. Now I want to create a new worksheet, and this will be my dashboard. So just go to my plus icon here at the end, create a new worksheet. I will just rename it as dashboard for the moment. And generally I like to keep my dashboards at the front of my Excel workbook. Dashboards generally, we're not going to put in data in any of the grid part of the Excel sheet. So therefore, the grid lines that are here tend to get in the way. So first of all, I tend to go into the View tab and just check off the grid lines to free us completely from that visual baggage. And everything from here on in that I put in will generally be floating. Things like text boxes and shapes and of course the actual pivot charts themselves. First things first, I'm going to put in a text box to label or title the whole dashboard. Now I'm going to start bringing in some of the different pivot charts that I created in the other worksheets. So let's bring in the revenue pivot chart first of all. Click in here and I'll just get rid of that total title again. And just select the pivot chart, cut it onto the clipboard, and then just go and paste it into the dashboard. And anytime that I cut and paste a pivot chart, the beauty about pivot charts is that all the references to the original pivot table last, and it doesn't matter that it's on a different worksheet. The connection is still there. Let me go ahead and pull in all of the other different charts that I have as well. And now that I've got my 4 different pivot charts in here, and of course there's no limit or threshold that I have to meet, it's completely up to you, the dashboard designer, in terms of what type of data that you want to display here. But as a designer, I have to weigh up how do these different charts fit together, and what's the best way to lay them out. So I'll play around here and try and get them to lay out as neatly as I can while still giving the visual impact of each of them. So with a bit of maneuvering, I've decided that this is a good layout. I'm also leaving space here somewhere in the dashboard for my user controls, things like slicers, so that the user can come in and look at different viewpoints of the data. Now that I've organized my charts in roughly the right kind of places, I want to align them. Now that the charts are in their new positions, obviously I don't have as much space in the original worksheets that the charts came from. So what I can do is now go back in, make new choices in terms of how I'm going to format these charts to show off the data and the data labels as best as I can. And now that I've got titles on each of the different charts, the last piece that I need to put in here is I need a little bit of user control. So interactivity, the way that the users can go in and decide what types of viewpoints it wants to use to analyze this data. And the key user control that we have in Excel is slicers to do with pivot tables. To insert a slicer, just need to go Insert. And as you can see, when I go into the Insert tab, I find the slicer option. It's actually not enabled. That's because I haven't selected any of the different charts yet. Let's just select the first one. And as soon as I select a pivot chart, the slicer comes on. Click on slicer there, and let's decide what type of slicers that we want. So I definitely want to analyze the years. And in the Treemap, we use subcategory. Maybe I want to kind of analyze the different overall product categories. And finally, we already have a chart here, the pie chart, which is the age group. I'm actually going to put in a slicer for age group as well. Let's click OK on all three of those slicers. The slicers come in as is. And now I'm going to set about just making those slicers a little bit more tidy and a little bit more intuitive. So I've moved the slicers into place here, or roughly into place. And the first thing I want to do is I'm going to right click on those and go Slicer Settings. And what I want to do is hide items with no data. Click OK, and it was those two different pieces and the years that I wanted to get rid of. So straight away on these slicers, as soon as I input them, they are actually live. They're live in whichever kind of pivot table they're connected to. So I had selected this revenue pivot table or pivot chart, and so they're live and connected to that. So for instance, if I come along here and just pick 2015, you can see the data, the chart changing there dynamically with the year that I'm picking. And if I want to choose multiple years, I can choose multiple select and turn on a few years together. And it's the same with all of the others as well. For instance, product category, bikes. Again, I only see the revenue pivot chart changing there. What I want to happen is when I click on any of those items in those slicers, that it affects all of those different pivot charts. But because I created them separately on all separate worksheets, they're not connected yet. It's only connected to whichever chart I had selected when I inserted the slicers. So I want to change that now. What I need to do is go into each one separately, right click, go into Report Connections. So Report Connections tells me which pivot chart this particular slicer is connected to at the moment. And I can see at the moment it's just connected to this revenue by date. But of course I want to check them all on. So click all of those pivot tables on. And that is that one done. And now we can see on that product category, it is now changing all of the different pivot charts just by clicking on the one slicer. So I want to go through that process on the other two slicers as well. I can't do it all together, unfortunately. So just click on Report Connections, check on all of the different charts for that, and also go to the last age group slicer, click on Report Connections, and check on all of the different pivot charts for those. And now, again, all of the different slicers are connected to all of the different pivot charts. So I've been left with the different slicers. I've got 3 of them left, and I need to fit them into this kind of square space here that's blank at the moment. Now, what I'd ideally like to have to make it tidy is I would like the overall space or screen real estate of this dashboard to all fit inside one rectangle neatly. And that's a little bit of a problem if I've got 3 slicers here and I need to fit them inside a square space. So I need to reorganize these. And so one way is to do them, to reorganize them horizontally. So I can take this one here, for example, move it out across there. And if we can, just let's fit it in here, just underneath that. Keep it nice and shallow. And then just in the slicer tab that comes up anytime that I select a slicer, go in and just say there was 3 items in it, so I want to just get 3 columns there. So now I see the actual 3 different options on that slicer all laying themselves out horizontally. And we'll do the same with age group as well. With age group, might need more than 1 row. We might need 2 rows. So again, I'll just take 3 columns. And then on the years, I could possibly take, and I can adjust the height here to fill up some of that space, make the controls nice and big so we don't have fat finger syndrome. And those are the steps to create a basic dashboard.